this is iconic, right? I know that picture. I've always, and this guy is sitting in this press conference and saying, I think it starts right now. This is also, one of these things that's, so, sorry about giving you a history lecture, but if you don't know about this, this is VGU after all, so I'm talking about the G. So people rushed to the frontier, and there were all these guys with their guns, right? And they were used to shooting people when they tried to cross the border. Seriously, so people came and said, look, we've just heard on TV that we are allowed to go to West Berlin, and we're allowed to cross the border. And they said, really, we know. And then they make phone calls, and they were told, yes, that's true. And then in this evening, thousands of people just rushed from East to West Berlin. And then, of course, the question was, what do we do? And then there were, we have the GDR and we have the FRG. And then in the end, it turned out that we just merged. Some people say it was not a merger, it was a takeover. It was the Western Germany taking over Eastern Germany. And some people in Eastern Germany still think they haven't been done justice. Now coming back to this graph, what do you think when an economy that is where the capital stock is not in good shape, what happens and it merges with an economy where the capital stock is in good shape? What happens? Well, what happens is, first of all, there was gigantic investment in the East, both at the private level and at the public level. Some of the machines that were used in GDR factories were from actually the 1930s. They were not competitive. The roads were in a miserable state. So the investment was huge. Now what happened? It's not that Germany experienced an earthquake, but Germany all of a sudden merged with a part where the capital stock was extremely low. And so secondly, there was a population that was just desperate to consume, because that's exactly what they were not allowed to do, or too little. So people were consuming all the stuff that they hadn't had before. Bananas, right? Getting a banana in the GDR was not easy, because GDR is not a country where bananas are grown. This is different here in this country. So the bottom line is, how do you explain the current account deficits of Germany in the 90s? That's unification. Now let me go back to the very beginning of this presentation, which is, of course, this is Germany in the 90s. And you see we had high investment rates in the 90s. And by comparison to later years, we had very low savings rates, right? That's exactly, these are the 90s, kind of the unification decade. Consuming, not reducing consumption, but increasing the capital stock, right? Having investment shares close to 25%. Quite recently, we had investment shares of GDP. Quite recently, we had investment shares of 20% of GDP. And the most obvious explanation of this constellation is German unification generating the need to build up the capital stock. Now, Germany having access to international financial markets used that access to finance part of this investment by, tapping international financial markets. And that's right. This is exactly what these models are useful, right? You look at such a pig. Someone says, why did Germany have a current account deficit in the 1990s? And you have an answer. And you don't have an answer. The law person, who I really respected and found very impressive, but he couldn't make this argument, right? Because he doesn't understand the mechanics of these things, and he was very open about that. So we're supposed to do that. And yep. So let me go back to my model. That's all the stuff we did. That's what we did today. here we are. Okay, so first point, there's something weird about this example because all the adjustment takes place in one period, right? So 50% of your capital stock is destroyed, you do gigantic investment, and then in period 2 you're back at steady state. This is not realistic. I mean, it took Germany 10 years to digest unification. Here it takes one period. Now, this is known as the excess volatility problem. One way to solve the problem is to make the model more complicated and to introduce so-called adjustment costs. Now, adjustment costs are a way of slowing down investment by making investment more costly. So the idea is the following. Costs of a given change in the capital stock are the higher, the lower the capital stock. So if you have a low capital stock, if you have 5 machines and you add 100, then this is very costly because you have to expand space, you have to train workers, you're changing the pattern of production completely. Conversely, so the investment, the adjustment cost is related to the initial capital stock. Conversely, if you have 1,000 machines or 5,000 machines and you're adding 100, that's not a big thing, right? So this, including this, makes the model more complicated, but also makes it more realistic in slowing down you will probably split the investment over several periods, right? You do not do it in one period. It was not that unification took place in 1990 and then in 1991 all the capital stock was there. It took 10 years. So you have a dampened reaction of investment in the current account. And that's what people do in more sophisticated models. They introduce this adjustment cost function and say, okay, this moves our model behavior closer to real time series. All right. Wow. We're now about to summarize, right? So we've done a lot of things, like we have the optimal time path of consumption investment as a solution to an intertemporal optimization problem. We've interpreted variations in the current account, reflecting variations in saving and investment. Driving mechanisms are consumption smoothing, the difference between the current capital stock and the optimal capital stock. And we've looked at 2 examples, the temporary drop of exogenous output and a one-time reduction of the capital stock. And I've also briefly talked about the role of adjustment costs. Now, what's missing? First of all, so far, we've looked at a representative consumer with dynastic preferences and a constant population growth rate. This is something that is not very useful if we want to model the effects of demographic structure. So for example, how does a country's demographic structure affect national savings, investment, the current account, etc., if agents have finite time horizon and a limited bequest motive? That's what we're going to do next. So in chapter 4, which is just around the corner, we look at that. Secondly, these are all, we had a single composite good and all trade was intertemporal trade. The question is what happens to national savings, investment, the current account, etc., if there are multiple goods with different degrees of tradability. Well, we talk about non-traded goods when we consider the real exchange rate. We'll not integrate it into this dynamic model, but we'll talk about it, what it means. We've assumed perfect foresight, and the only asset traded on international capital markets is a risk-free bond. So what happens to national savings, investment, the current account, etc., if risk-averse agents face uncertainty? Unfortunately, we don't have time to explicitly address uncertainty in this course, but chapter 4 or 5 of my book is devoted to this topic. Meaning that this is not exam material, right? It's not that I say, okay, you should read this, and I'll ask you a question about, stuff that we haven't touched upon in this course. So far, claims on international capital markets are perfectly enforceable and agents never violate the intertemporal budget constraints. So what happens to international capital flows if claims cannot be enforced and if agents have an incentive to default on their debt? Again, unfortunately, we don't have time to explicitly address imperfect capital markets in this course, but chapter 6 of my book is devoted to this topic. Again, I'm playing it fair. It's not that this will be. Here's some food for thought, right? Give me that stuff that yeah, it's actually interesting, right? The first thing is, do agents always stick to their ex-ante plans? I mean, seriously, we make plans and then we deviate from them. Sometimes we deviate from them because we get new information. But sometimes we deviate from them because at the time when we think we should implement the plan, we don't. People promise to themselves that they quit smoking on New Year's Eve, and then the next day they light the next cigarette, right? People promise to themselves and to others that they eat less chocolate